Okay, The Power of a Teacher, Chapter 6 by Saenz. Chapter 6 is Spiritual Well-Being. I'm honestly thinking about switching careers. Seriously though, why am I doing this? A teacher who is not experiencing spiritual well-being is, to reference a parable, building a life on a sandy foundation. When the storms of personal doubt and circumstantial trials inevitably roll in, that foundation tends to give way and life becomes anything but stable. Is there a more reliable weather forecast than the one predicting those storms in the life of a teacher? If I am that teacher, I will experience recurring gut checks and second guessing about whether I should be teaching, whether this never-ending fight is all there is for me in life. Are you that teacher? If so, your hope lies in the reality that you have the power to make life choices that are consistent with your value system. You also have the power to surround yourself with individuals who share your values, encourage you, and challenge you in honest, character-building ways. What is spiritual well-being? I may be wrong, but I suspect this section of the book will generate the broadest range of initial reactions from readers. The word spiritual is loaded with connotation, fair or unfair. Some of you will self-identify as deeply spiritual, though what that means will vary greatly. Others will claim to not be spiritual at all, generally reacting to the assumption that to be spiritual is to be some particular brand of religion. Rather than operating from a narrow sense of spiritual health that would exclude many, I would like to reframe the term spiritual for the sake of our look at personal well-being. I believe there is a way of understanding and addressing spiritual well-being that is essential for everyone. In a broad sense, spirituality is generally considered to be the uniquely human search for meaning and purpose in life. For some, that search leads to certain religious beliefs or experiences. For others, it does not. In either case, the search for meaning and purpose, sometimes conscious and other times quite accidental, leads us to a particular set of values or beliefs. So when I refer to spiritual wellness, I am addressing our capacity to integrate our beliefs and values with our actions, a challenge common to all of us, no matter the particular of those beliefs and values. And it is indeed a challenge. Part of what is tricky about maintaining spiritual wellness is that for most, establishing our beliefs and values tends to be a dynamic, lifelong process that ties into a broad range of relevant issues: family, education, religion, health, wealth, community service, diversity, life experience, and so on. Ongoing discussion and personal reflection are central to the process. Linking that belief and value system with our routine actions and decision-making can be an abstract process at worst, and a tentative one at best. In other words, our spiritual development often happens to us before we realize it, and even when we are conscious and engaged, it is rarely a fully controlled, simple part of life. In some ways, then, maintaining spiritual well-being can be like the proverbial effort to nail Jell-O to a tree. I believe it is possible, though, to build a relatively simple framework for nurturing spiritual health amidst the ever-changing dynamics of life. Again, the goal is to invest appropriate energy and time in what we can control in an effort to live more fully through the circumstances of life that we cannot control. Spiritual well-being, the keys. Key number 1, link decision-making with life values. Regardless of how we define spirituality, the practice of spirituality boils down to making decisions, big and small, in the context of our value system. Should I marry this person? Should we have children? Should I choose this career? Should I try this cigarette? Parker Palmer is an educator and founder of the Center for Courage and Renewal, which oversees the Courage to Teach program for K-12 educators. Palmer has written exclusively in the area of teacher motivation, and he frequently reminds us of the true meaning of vocation. The word derives from the Latin vocare, meaning to call. He describes the differences among a job, a career, and a calling. A job is what we might do from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. to earn a paycheck. A career is a job with potential for advancement. A calling is what we would do if money were no object because the activity itself would be intrinsically fulfilling. Research is consistent. Teachers who retire and, in retrospect, express enthusiasm without regret about their life's vocation. Yes, those people do exist. Conceptualize their work not as a job, not as a career, but as a calling. Teaching from an internal sense of calling is not, I'll teach until something better comes along, but I'm choosing this profession because my role as a teacher is consistent with my value system. At the core, the teacher who thrives in the profession places such a high premium on impacting students' lives that the inconveniences and hardships associated with functioning in an imperfect educational system cannot deter them from that calling. In essence, the call to any profession will continually ring more loudly than the discouraging white noise associated with the work. Steve Farkas, a senior research fellow at the Farkas-Dufay Research Group, was curious about what kept teachers consistently and deeply engaged in their roles as educators. The common denominator he found was that the vast majority of teachers who had sustained enthusiasm over the course of a career were those who believed they were responding to a calling in choosing the field of education. This challenged the stereotype that teachers are not satisfied in what they do. I recognize the dilemma. Many teachers can identify some sense of calling, whether it preceded their first teaching job or emerged through real experience with students, but the purity of the calling has become muddled over time. I suspect this is more the rule than the exception in modern education. My experience in working with teachers tells me that in most cases, real hope is in the realization of calling, not the abandonment of it. This is why spiritual wellness, starting with a renewed connection between what really matters to you and the decisions you make about your vocation, is essential for teachers. Key number 2, share life with like-minded individuals. Just as professional community is essential to occupational well-being, so is personal community essential to spiritual well-being. Our professional community is the collection of individuals with whom we share common professional space and aspirations. Our personal community is the collection of individuals with those we share common personal values and belief about life purpose. Sometimes those two communities can overlap. In The Different Drum, Community Making and Peace, American psychiatrist M. Scott Peck outlines his observation of how community develops based on his work with hundreds of individuals participating in therapeutic encounter groups. A group arrives at community only after the individuals in the group have made commitments to quantity and quality of shared time and space. The commitment to quantity is necessary to ensure adequate time for interaction. When a group meets only on random or spontaneous basis, the meetings lack the frequency necessary to develop comfort and rapport. The commitment to quality is necessary to ensure that the individuals develop the mutual trust that is necessary to facilitate transparency and authenticity without the fear of rejection. In the context of a safe community, individuals are free to discuss deeply personal and emotion-laden issues, not merely for personal therapy, but as part of an effort to strengthen, refine, and integrate personal values. If that reads more like a clinical definition than warm advocacy for community, let me try it this way. People need people. The long story of human history, whether viewed through the lens of real data or anecdotally, is that isolation and disconnection erodes our sense of being and purpose. Community and meaningful interpersonal connection enhance our overall health and quality of life. Many of us have so embraced other values, perhaps most notably busyness and privacy, that we have set ourselves up to fail in areas we assume to be unrelated to those values, including a personal sense of calling and spiritual well-being. If you are by nature an introvert, I am, true community is an invaluable protection against the kind of detachment that inevitably either spirals into too much or too little self-confidence, or produces an aloofness that is equally toxic to one's calling. If you are by nature an extrovert, true community ensures that you live beyond surface interactions and tend to the deeper parts of your identity and calling. For all of us, meaningful, ongoing connection with others makes us human and engages our spirit so that we can invest in our calling without depending on it alone to sustain us. Conclusion. Jennifer's question is both deep and sincere. Why am I doing this? It suggests that she is experiencing crisis that is not merely vocational. It is a crisis of belief and values, and it is profoundly spiritual. Her doubt extends beyond how she earns money and into her sense of calling and purpose. What she values, teaching children, suddenly feels out of sync with the career she chose. Knowing she cannot change the system in significant ways, her question is natural. Is there any way to reconcile my values and continue this job? And let's be honest, Jennifer needs more than platitudes with kids about being worth it. If she's going to continue to teach and find fulfillment, she needs to be able to reconnect her values with what she's doing, even if the system never changes. I believe spiritual wellness, not to be confused with spiritual perfection, is possible, even for teachers laboring in extremely difficult environments. It won't happen overnight, but like most change, it will happen one decision at a time. Start by taking intentional steps to reconnect to your sense of purpose and calling, and then find ways to invest that energy into your daily classroom routine. Please don't try to do it alone. Relentlessly search for or build community. That won't be perfect either, but a connected crowd, even a small one, of imperfect people will change not only your perspective, but also your ability to look back at your years of teaching not with regret, but with joy and fulfillment. Summary. Spirituality is not necessarily religion. Spiritual well-being is the process of effectively considering and incorporating one's beliefs and values in decision-making process. Sharing life with individuals who share one's values is essential to spiritual wellness. Spiritual well-being, recommendations for action. Do. Number 1, do prioritize spending time with others who share your value system. Connect with a church community or religious group, participate in community events, volunteer at a nonprofit organization. Number 2, do evaluate or reevaluate how your role as a teacher overlaps with your value system and calling. Number 3, do write a letter to yourself. Remind yourself why you chose to enter education, including the hopes you have for your investment in your calling. Number 4, do keep a calling journal. Document each conversation, situation, or interaction that illustrates to you why what you do is a calling, not just a job or a career. The point is to be deliberate and mindful when life speaks to you about the gravity of your role in the lives of your students. Number 5, do find a friend with whom you can press into deeper relational authenticity and transparency. We all have a built-in fear of being vulnerable, but we can grow in our ability to be less controlled by any fear. Start by asking a good question and then being a good listener. If you're met with a short response, model vulnerability by offering an honest answer to the same question. Watch a TED Talk, and the link is listed here. It's titled Flow. This is an excellent talk on the psychological factors that constitute a life worth living. And our list of don'ts. Number 1, don't practice the kind of hurried lifestyle that makes time for reflection improbable. Number 2, don't try to live life and maintain your sense of purpose on your own. We were made for community, and our sense of who we are, a central part of our spiritual health, is deeply tied to our connections with others. Number 3, don't believe that this is all there is. As soon as you begin thinking that way, reject the thought and call it a lie, because it is. All right, now we have an excerpt before our questions with Dr. Saenz. And this is about Coach Crisell's power to change Doug Baker's life. I learned at an early age that real men don't cry. My dad was a football coach, and I can't tell you how many times I heard him say, just rub some dirt on it and get back in the game. By the time I was in junior high school, I quit telling people I was hurt, and I just kept things to myself. I loved movies like Scarface and Rambo because they portrayed a man's man. Lead characters that were always in control, needed no one, and were never hindered by pain. Those men were my heroes until a lesson in Mrs. Falstaff's world history class changed everything. We were studying the Vietnam War, and as part of the lesson, Mrs. Falstaff invited Coach Criswell to give a guest lecture. Most of us knew Coach Criswell was a pretty even-keeled type of guy. He never seemed to get really angry, never really excited. He was just pretty predictable and consistent. I don't know that any of us knew he had served in the Army during the Vietnam War. The purpose of his guest lecture was to give us an idea of the political ideas involved in the war and how those ideas influenced his role as a soldier. The lecture started off as a fairly nondescript talk about communism and democracy and how and why the U.S. was invested in the events of Vietnam. As Coach Criswell continued, though, he began to talk more and more about his day-to-day role as a soldier. We noticed that at some point his speech slowed, like he was struggling to get each word out. Then he stopped talking, and tears filled his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. I don't know that any of us students in that moment could fully appreciate the gravity of what Coach Criswell was experiencing, but Mrs. Falstaff knew. She had told us before that she had lost 7 friends in the conflict. She immediately jumped in. Coach, thank you so much, but we can stop right here and that will be fine. No, Mrs. Falstaff. I need to do this. Coach Criswell insisted through his tears. He proceeded to describe in real terms the effects the war had and continued to have on him. He concluded by emphasizing what an honor it had been to serve his country and how he had no regrets. He thanked us for giving him the opportunity to share and said telling his story was part of his healing. I was in awe. I had never seen a man model that kind of transparency and certainly never heard that doing so was actually beneficial. Now, as a husband and a father, I always remember how necessary it is to be connected and to let people know when I'm hurting. Thank you, Coach Criswell, for teaching me that real men understand the value of vulnerability. Doug Baker, a software engineer. All right, questions for discussion where I will answer Dr. Saenz or share Dr. Saenz' responses. Number 1, would you rather do something you don't like with people you like or do something you like with people you don't like? Definitely something I don't like with people I do like. I love music and have played in bands before. When I've played with guys I don't like, making music just is not fun. Number 2, when did you decide to become a teacher? Well, I obviously didn't, but as far as my current vocation, I think I've always been cut out to be a psychologist, philosopher, cleric type. But even when I was in junior high, I was deeply curious about the nature of life. Why do we do what we do? What are the internal and external factors that drive human behavior? Number 3, where did you go to share life with individuals where do you go to share life with individuals who share your values? I go to the members of the community church of Bryan in College Station. Number 4, when does being a teacher just feel like a job, a career, a calling? Well, being a psychologist feels like a job when I get referrals from parents who want me to fix their kid without being willing to do any work on their own to see what they are doing to contribute to the problem. The same dynamic can also happen in marital counseling. Just fix my spouse without having to ask me to look into a mirror. Blah. It also feels like a job when I spend 38 minutes on the phone being looped through an automated response system trying to get an insurance company to pre-authorize treatment. Being a psychologist feels like a career when I consider the logistics of managing a clinic. There are so many services to offer: therapy, assessment, consultation to schools, etc. It seems our role as psychologists is ever expanding. Being a psychologist feels like a calling when I have interacted with someone else, maybe in my office, maybe on a campus, and we have both been made healthier ultimately by that interaction. Number 5, in what small ways can you reconnect your truest sense of calling as a teacher to your daily routines, even if nothing about your circumstances ever changes? And that is the end of chapter 6 in Dr. Saenz's book, The Power of a Teacher.